The millionaire who helped a homeless man and was surprised by a shocking revelation. He lost everything: family, home, and even hope. But the unexpected is about to happen. A man without direction receives an offer he can't refuse. A mysterious millionaire appears, offering something that could change his life forever. Who is this millionaire? And why is he so interested in someone who has already lost everything? What seems like the perfect opportunity carries hidden challenges and enormous risks. One wrong choice and everything could collapse for good. But could this be the redemption he's been waiting for? The clock is ticking, and the decision he makes will change his destiny forever. John Harper always believed his life would follow a certain path. He lived in Cedar Falls, a small town without many opportunities but that offered security. His parents, hardworking people, did everything to give him what they believed was best: a good education, strong values, and a cozy home. His father, a mechanic respected for his honesty, and his mother, a dedicated seamstress, didn't have much, but they were rich in love and effort. To John, this kind of wealth was the most important. The warmth of home and the sense of belonging always comforted him. Since childhood, John loved spending time in his father's garage. He watched as his father worked with his hands, turning old, rusty cars into powerful machines. To John, there was something magical about the process. He admired his father greatly but knew he wanted to follow a different path. Though he respected the mechanic profession, John dreamed of a different life, away from the grease and grime. He decided to study mechanical engineering, believing it was the key to a stable future. John's plan was simple: graduate, get a good job, and ensure a comfortable life without facing the struggles his parents endured. However, life had other plans. At 20 years old, he was struck by a tragedy he never imagined. His parents were in a car accident and died. The news came on an ordinary April afternoon like a shock, leaving John completely devastated. The safe world he knew suddenly crumbled. The loss of his parents left him feeling empty, lonely, and directionless. The house he grew up in, once full of life, now felt cold and soulless. On top of the emotional pain, John faced financial difficulties. The bills began to pile up quickly, and he realized he couldn't keep up with the rent on the house he grew up in. The eviction notice was the final blow. It wasn't just the loss of a home. It was the loss of memories and the sense of security his parents had given him. He walked through the empty house, remembering the happy childhood moments, and every corner brought a silent goodbye to the past. The feeling of failure was inevitable. John began to feel he had let himself and his parents down. He had made plans to improve his life and his family's, but in the end, he felt utterly powerless. Each box he packed, as he prepared to leave the house, deepened the feeling of loss. He wasn't just leaving a house behind. He was leaving behind all the memories of who he was before the tragedy. With nowhere to go, John turned to Mark, his longtime friend, for help. Mark was generous and offered him a space in his home, but John felt like a burden, someone who didn't belong there. Moving into Mark's basement was, for him, confirmation of his failure. The nights spent in that damp and dark space were marked by painful thoughts. John reflected on where he had gone wrong, trying to find someone to blame. But deep down, life doesn't always offer answers. Days turned into a cycle of despair. John tried to find a job and finish college, but everything seemed out of reach. Survival became his daily struggle, and the dreams of a better life grew more distant. He was trapped in a sea of failures, and the pressure mounted with each passing day. Every attempt to rebuild his life reminded him of everything he had lost, especially the support and presence of his parents. Despite everything, there was a small spark of hope within John. He needed to find a way to stand up again, but he didn't know where to start. The pain was so deep that he often found himself paralyzed, unable to make any decisions. The weight of his responsibilities grew heavier each day, and he wondered if he would ever feel whole again. Then, on a random day, Mark, noticing his friend's state, asked John to help him clean out the garage. John, with nothing to lose, agreed. In that garage, among tools and old boxes, he found car parts that belonged to Mark's father, a passionate collector. Holding one of those parts, John was transported back in time to memories of his father. The memories flooded in, and John felt a new light ignite within him. Those parts could be his way out, his chance to start again. So, the next morning, he returned to the garage and started working. Each restored part was like a piece of himself he was trying to fix. The process was difficult, but it brought a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. When he listed the first parts online, John was surprised by the interest from collectors. It was a market he had never considered. However, the fear of failure still loomed. Could he turn that small talent into a business? Or was he just deluding himself once again? In the days following the discovery of the old parts, John felt a change within himself. For the first time since his parents' death, he had something occupying his mind beyond sadness. Restoring old car parts gave him a new sense of purpose. The physical work, the smell of oil and metal, and the focus required for every detail helped him feel useful again. Though he continued to live in Mark's basement, John started spending more time in the garage. The space, once just a mess of tools and old objects, became the place where he began to rebuild his life, piece by piece. The environment reminded him of his father, which brought a mixture of nostalgia and peace. Each restored part was a small victory, a step toward overcoming the pain. The first online sales were modest, but interest grew. For John, it was more than just money. It was confirmation that he was on the right path. Restoring old parts, something he had learned as a child from his father, began to bring not only financial relief but also a sense of accomplishment. Mark, always a loyal friend, quickly noticed the change in John. One day, while helping his friend polish a rare part, Mark commented on the progress. "Who would have thought those old parts had so much value, huh?" he said with a smile. John chuckled slightly, but doubts still lingered. The initial success brought with it a new anxiety. What if it was just luck? What if the sales suddenly stopped? The fear of failure crept in again, especially during the lonely nights in the basement. He was surrounded by uncertainty, but he knew he couldn't stop. Each sale was a relief, but it also brought more pressure to continue delivering high-quality parts. In the days that followed, John noticed something that excited him even more. Customers were not only buying the parts he restored, but also starting to place special orders. They were searching for rare parts, trusting that John could find and restore them. This motivated him to expand his search for materials. He began frequenting scrapyards, seeking contacts who might have old parts, and even scavenging abandoned workshops, all in pursuit of new opportunities. With each new part he found, John felt like he was not only rebuilding cars but also his own life. The process of restoring something old and making it new reflected what he was trying to do with himself. He poured his soul into each restoration as a way to heal from the pain of losing his parents. Over time, John realized there was more to this market than he had initially thought. Collectors of vintage cars sought rare and well-preserved parts and were willing to pay high prices. This reignited his hope that he could turn his skill into a real business. However, doubt persisted. Could he truly maintain the standard and expand? Realizing the growing demand, John began investing more time in searching for new parts, visiting scrapyards, and old workshops he hadn't gone to, looking for materials to restore. Every discovery was a new opportunity. Sometimes, he found parts that didn't seem valuable at first, but with his knowledge and patience, he transformed them into something collectors desired. But with success came the weight of responsibility. The fear of failure was always present. Every time John found a new part or listed something for sale, he worried about what might come next. Could he keep going? Or was the market a bubble ready to burst? Doubt followed him, but he couldn't stop now. The initial success brought a new vision of the future for John. He was at a crossroads. If he continued restoring parts alone, he might survive, but he would never have the stability he so desired. On the other hand, expanding the business would bring new challenges and risks, something he wasn't sure he was ready to face yet. John decided to move forward. The sale of each restored part was one more step toward his goal, and though the path would be difficult, it wasn't impossible. What had started as a way to overcome the pain was now a chance to start over. Now, more than ever, he was determined to make the most of this opportunity, both to honor his father's memory and to secure a brighter future for himself. After realizing that there was a growing demand for the vintage car parts he was restoring, John began to dream bigger. However, he also knew that early success was no guarantee of the future. The fear of failure remained in his mind, and the pressure to keep the business running kept him up at night. That's when he heard about an opportunity that could change everything. One of his first customers mentioned the name David Rutledge, a highly respected collector of rare cars in the world of vintage automobile enthusiasts. Rutledge wasn't just a collector. He was also a millionaire who enjoyed investing in new talent. John couldn't get the name out of his head. Could this be the opportunity he had been waiting for? A client like David could transform his small business into something much bigger. However, the fear of not being good enough kept him from acting. For days, John was undecided about what to do. He didn't have much time or money to spare, and the idea of exposing himself to risk scared him. Doubt consumed him. How could a beginner restorer, who could barely pay his bills, impress someone so influential? What if he made a mistake? The fear of failing was so great that it paralyzed him. That's when Mark, as usual, stepped in with his practical advice. During a conversation, as John was sharing his concerns, Mark got straight to the point. "What do you have to lose?" he asked bluntly. "You're already facing so many difficulties. If this doesn't work out, you'll be in the same position. But if it works, it could change everything." Those words stuck in John's mind. He really didn't have much to lose. The fear of failure was strong, but the idea of never trying was even worse. He decided to take the first step and try to contact David Rutledge. Getting in touch with David was harder than John had imagined. The millionaire was very reserved and surrounded by a team of advisors and secretaries who kept any contact under strict control. Even so, John didn't give up. He made several calls, sent messages, and even tried to get references from some clients. His persistence paid off when, after days of attempts, one of David's assistants agreed to schedule a meeting. The news brought a mix of relief and anxiety. John knew this was his big chance, but he also knew he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. He spent the next few days preparing, organizing his best restorations, and putting together a presentation that showcased all his work. He wanted every detail to be perfect. The idea of impressing David made him nervous, but it was the only way to move forward. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. John dressed in his best clothes and went to David Rutledge's mansion. As he passed through the grand gates of the estate, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. The mansion was a representation of David's power and influence, and the thought of failing in such a grand setting only increased John's apprehension. When he arrived at the house, he was greeted by a staff member who led him to the living room. David Rutledge was already waiting for him, seated in a comfortable armchair. He appeared to be a calm man, but his observant gaze indicated that he was used to analyzing people and situations. John tried to remain calm, but he felt his hands sweating as he shook the millionaire's hand. "John Harper, right?" David said with a slight smile. "I've heard about your work. I'm curious to know more." John took a deep breath and began telling his story. He spoke about his childhood alongside his father, the tragic loss of his parents, and how restoring vintage car parts had become his way of rebuilding himself. He didn't use grand words or exaggerate his achievements. David was an experienced man who would see through any attempt to embellish the truth. So, John focused on sincerity, explaining how his skills and dedication were the result of hard work. David listened attentively, and after a few minutes of silence, he finally spoke. Your work is impressive. It's not easy to find someone with your level of care and passion for what they do. I like that. John felt relief wash over him. Those words, coming from someone so important, were the validation he needed. David continued, I have a collection of cars that need restoration. I want you to take care of them. If the work is as good as I see here, we can talk about a long-term partnership. John's heart raced. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. With a restrained smile, he replied, It would be an honor. I promise I won't disappoint you. David smiled back. I believe in you, John. Let's make this happen. That night, back in the basement, John could hardly believe what had just happened. This was his chance to change his life, but he also knew the challenge ahead would be great. The opportunity to work with David Rutledge was a dream come true, but now the responsibility was even greater. He would have to prove more than ever that he was up to the task. With David Rutledge's proposal in hand, John found himself in a state of both relief and nervousness. He had finally gotten the chance he had been searching for, but now he had to prove he could deliver what David expected. The cars Rutledge wanted restored were not just any vehicles. They were rare, valuable models steeped in history. One mistake could cost not only the partnership with David but also his reputation. When the first trucks arrived at the garage where John worked, he was speechless. The cars being unloaded were masterpieces of design and engineering. Classic models from the 1950s and 1960s, many of which he had only seen in magazines or museums. Now, they were his responsibility. John knew he couldn't make any mistakes. He spent hours studying each car, analyzing the details, and planning the restorations. He knew he couldn't rush the work, but the pressure to deliver impeccable results kept him awake many nights. John also remembered the stories his father used to tell him about classic cars, which motivated him to keep going, even when the exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders. In the early days, John worked tirelessly. David expected the best, and the possibility of disappointing him frightened John. The restoration work required a lot of patience and attention to the smallest details. Every part had to be adjusted with precision, and John wasn't willing to compromise on quality. Mark, always a loyal friend, continued helping with organizing the workshop and handling simpler tasks. The two of them worked well together, and slowly the cars began to come back to life. John knew he was on the right path, but the pressure to deliver perfection wore him down mentally. David Rutledge wasn't a client who visited often, but when he did come to the workshop, his presence was felt. He observed the progress closely, evaluating every detail without saying much. During one of these visits, David approached John while he was adjusting the engine of one of the cars. This car was one of the first in my collection, David commented, looking at the vehicle with a nostalgic expression. It represents the beginning of everything for me. John listened attentively, absorbing the story. To David, these cars weren't just valuable objects. They represented important milestones in his life. This only increased the weight of responsibility on John. He had to ensure the work was flawless. After months of intense labor, the first car was finally restored. It was a true masterpiece. John looked at the result with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. He had given it his best, and the car looked new, as if it had just rolled out of the factory. When David came to inspect the restored car, silence filled the workshop. John watched closely for David's reaction as he walked around the vehicle, analyzing every detail. John's heart raced, and he could barely contain his anxiety. After a long moment of evaluation, David finally spoke. "It's perfect, John. More than I expected." Those words brought immense relief to John. He had succeeded. All the hard work and sleepless nights had been worth it. John responded sincerely, "I'm so glad you liked it." David smiled, satisfied, and then said something John would never forget. "I didn't just like it. I want you to continue. I think we're just getting started." John felt a wave of emotion. This was more than just the end of a well-done job. It was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He had proven his worth, and now David was willing to continue the partnership. This meant that John had not only gained a client but also a long-term supporter. David made an unexpected proposal. In addition to continuing to restore the other cars in his collection, he wanted to invest in John's business. David saw potential in him, and more than that, he saw honesty and dedication. For David, these qualities were even more important than technical skill. "I believe in your talent and integrity, John," David said. "I want to help expand your business. What do you say?" John was speechless for a few seconds, trying to process the proposal. It was far more than he had ever dreamed of. With a trembling voice filled with emotion, he replied, "I don't even know how to thank you, but I accept the offer. I promise to keep doing my best." David smiled, pleased. "No need to thank me. Just keep doing what you do best." With that agreement, John knew his life was about to change completely. He now had the resources and support from David to turn his small workshop into a thriving business. However, along with this opportunity would come new challenges, and he would need to be ready to face them. With the support of David Rutledge and the expansion of the business, John saw his workshop transform. What had once been a small personal project was now growing rapidly. Sales increased, and John's reputation as a talented restorer spread. Collectors of classic cars began seeking him out, asking him to restore their vehicles. The success he had longed for had finally arrived, but along with it came new challenges. As the orders piled up, John realized he couldn't do everything on his own anymore. Restoring vintage cars is a process that requires time, patience, and meticulous attention to detail. To continue growing, he would need more help. So, John decided to hire a team of young people who, like him, were passionate about classic cars and eager to learn. But for someone who had always worked alone, delegating tasks was a major challenge. John felt an overwhelming need to control every aspect of the work. He reviewed everything his new employees did, worried that any mistake could compromise his reputation. This perfectionism ended up creating immense pressure, both on him and his team. John worked late into the night, slept poorly, and felt the weight of expectations crushing him. "You need to trust your team more, John," Mark said, always there to support his friend. "You can't do everything yourself. That's why you hired help, right?" John knew Mark was right, but he still felt responsible for every detail. The fear that something might go wrong kept him constantly on edge. But over time, he realized he needed to change his approach. If he continued like this, he would burn out, and the business, which was thriving, could collapse. He began to dedicate more time to training his team, sharing the knowledge he had accumulated over the years. He started delegating tasks more confidently, watching closely but giving his employees more autonomy. Slowly, John came to understand that for his business to grow, he had to trust the people around him. However, as John got better at delegating, new problems arose. The success of his workshop began to attract the attention of competitors, some of whom were willing to act dishonestly to push John out of the way. The first major crisis came when John, unknowingly, bought a batch of counterfeit parts from a supplier he trusted. The parts, which were supposed to be originals, were of poor quality and useless for restoration. The financial loss was significant. John had invested a large portion of the business's money in those parts, and now they were worthless. Additionally, his reputation was at risk. If his clients found out he was using counterfeit parts, the name he had worked so hard to build could be destroyed. John spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how to solve the problem. The pressure of dealing with such a major mistake left him discouraged, and for a brief moment he considered giving up. But David Rutledge, always present and attentive, stepped in to help. Upon learning of the situation, David used his influence to help John reverse the deal with the supplier. The counterfeit parts were returned, and John was able to recover some of the lost money. This episode was a big lesson for John. He realized that the business world was full of risks and that not everyone could be trusted. From that point on, he became much more cautious in his negotiations and partnerships. Although the problem had been resolved, the experience left him more guarded and slightly distanced from the initial passion he had for the work. While John tried to stay focused on growing the business, he noticed something important. His time with Mark, one of the biggest sources of support in his life, had significantly decreased. Mark, who had always been around, was now more distant, busy with his own life and career. John knew that both of them had taken on more responsibilities, but he missed the carefree conversations and afternoons they spent working together in the garage. The growing distance between them started to weigh on John, and he realized that in addition to the challenges of the business, he needed to find a balance between success and personal relationships. Determined not to lose that connection, John invited Mark for coffee. They talked about the past, about the moments that shaped them, and John apologized for letting work consume his life. Mark, always understanding, said he knew the pressure John was under. However, he reminded John that success meant nothing if it drove him away from the people who had always been by his side. That coffee meeting brought the two friends closer again, and John promised himself that he wouldn't lose sight of what truly mattered. In addition, John began to look for ways to take better care of himself. After months of intense pressure, he began to feel the signs of physical and mental exhaustion. He woke up tired, had trouble concentrating, and often felt that the burden of being the boss was too great. That's when Mark suggested that John take time for something other than work. Despite the challenges of balancing the business, John started running in the mornings. Running through the empty streets of the town gave him a sense of freedom, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Gradually, John learned that taking care of himself was just as important as taking care of his business. With the changes John made in managing the workshop, he began to find a balance between work and personal life. He learned to trust his team and to dedicate more time to himself. This not only improved his mental health but also brought back the joy he once had in restoring cars. However, there was something inside John that still bothered him. He wanted to do more than just make money and restore vehicles. He wanted to leave a legacy that went beyond financial success. That's when an idea began to form in his mind. Ever since his parents' death, John had felt a deep connection to Cedar Falls, the town where he grew up. Many families there faced the same struggles he and his parents had endured. It was at this moment that John decided he wanted to give back to the community that had supported him during the hardest times of his life. With financial backing from David Rutledge, John decided to build a community center in Cedar Falls. The goal was to create a space where young people and families could receive support, learn new skills, and find job opportunities. Many of the youth, like John once had, lacked much hope for the future. The community center would offer technical courses, such as car restoration, as well as emotional and financial guidance for those in need. David was excited about the idea and personally invested in the project. He believed that helping others was a powerful way to leave a lasting legacy. So, John and David began planning the construction of the community center, which quickly became a symbol of hope for Cedar Falls. When the community center was inaugurated, John felt that his journey had reached a new level. He was no longer just restoring cars. He was helping to restore lives. Seeing young people learn and gain confidence brought him a sense of fulfillment that financial success alone had never provided. One afternoon, as John was walking through the community center, a humble-looking woman approached him, holding an old, worn-out photo. "Excuse me, are you John Harper?" she asked. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" John replied with a smile. The woman handed him the photo. When John looked at the image, his heart skipped a beat. It was a picture of an old car, and in the background he saw his father standing beside the vehicle. The memory hit him hard, and John felt an immediate connection to the past. "My name is Alice," the woman said. "My father worked with yours many years ago. They were restoring this car together before the accident. I found the car on our family's farm and thought you might want to see it. Maybe finish the work your father started. John was overwhelmed with emotion. He had always restored cars for others, but now he had the opportunity to complete something his own father had begun. Without hesitation, he accepted Alice's offer. At that moment, he knew that restoring that car would be more than just a job. It would be a way to honor his father's memory and close a chapter in his life. A few days later, John went to Alice's farm and found the car. It was in rough shape, covered in dust and rust, but John saw its potential. This car, more than any other, needed to be restored with all the care in the world. Back at the workshop, John dedicated himself entirely to the project. He spent weeks restoring the car, piece by piece, until it was finally ready. The result was a masterpiece, a true homage to his father's legacy. John decided to donate the restored car to the community center. He knew that the money raised would help transform even more lives, and this gesture was his way of ensuring that his father's legacy continued to impact the community. While working at the community center, John also began to engage more directly with the young people who attended. He saw himself in many of them, youth without direction or great expectations but with hidden talents waiting to be discovered. John started offering car restoration workshops, teaching the skills he had learned from his father. Seeing the passion ignite in the eyes of the young people when a car came back to life gave John a renewed sense of purpose. In one of the sessions, a young boy named Mike, who always seemed distracted and distant, surprised John. During the workshop, Mike began to stand out, showing a natural talent for mechanics. John approached the boy, talked to him, and discovered that, like John himself in the past, Mike had lost his parents in an accident. Working in the workshop was the first time Mike had felt useful in a long time. John felt that fate had brought Mike into his life for a reason. He decided to invest in the boy, offering him an internship at his workshop. For John, seeing Mike evolve and find his path in life was one of the greatest triumphs of his career. It was no longer just about restoring cars, but about giving people the chance to restore their own lives. Now, at 35, John Harper had become more than just a car restorer. He was a man who had overcome pain, fear, and hardship to become an inspiration in his community. He restored cars, yes, but he also restored hope, dreams, and futures. The cycle was complete, and John, at last, felt at peace with his journey.